The space race was a period of competition between the Soviet Union and the United States over who could conquer space exploration first. But before starting the video, please subscribe to the channel if you have not subscribed yet and hit that bell icon to receive every video notification. The space race was a 20th century struggle between two nation-states, the Soviet Union, USSR, and the United States, US. The pursuit for both was the domination of space flight technologies. The competition began on the 2nd of August 1955, when the Soviet Union responded to the US announcement of their similar intent to launch artificial satellites. The space race has its origins in the nuclear arms race between the two nations following the Second World War. Both sides were aided by German missile technology and scientists from their missile program. The technological advantages required for such power were seen as necessary for national security and political superiority. The space race produced groundbreaking efforts to launch artificial satellites, space probes of the Moon, Venus, and Mars, and human space voyages in low Earth orbit and lunar missions. The space race between the United States, US, and the Soviet Union, USSR, was a remarkable time in history with many far-reaching achievements in science, space exploration, and technology. This timeline shows the 20-year competition between the two nations. Space race timeline. The 2nd of August 1955, the USSR responds to the US announcement that they intend to launch the first artificial satellite into space with a satellite of their own. The 4th of October 1957, the USSR successfully launches Sputnik 1, the first Earth-orbiting satellite in history. The 3rd of November 1957, the USSR successfully launches Sputnik 2, carrying a dog named Laika into space. They become the first nation to successfully send a living organism into orbit. The 1st of October 1958, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, is created in the US, replacing the National Advisory Committee on Aeronautics, NACA. The 2nd of January 1959, the USSR launches Luna 1, known as the first cosmic rocket, as it accidentally escaped the orbit of the Moon due to the object having too much speed. Luna 1 becomes the first human-made object to leave the orbit of the Earth and orbit the Sun instead. The 2nd of August 1959, the US launches Explorer 6, the world's first weather satellite, and obtains the first pictures of Earth from space. The 12th of September 1959, the USSR launches Luna 2 and accomplishes its mission of creating the first spacecraft to reach the surface of the Moon. The 4th of October 1959, the USSR launches Luna 3 and succeeds in their mission of sending an object into orbit around the Moon and photographing the far side of the Moon. The 19th of August 1960, aboard the Soviet Union's Sputnik 5, the first animals, 2 dogs, Belka and Strelka, and a range of plants are returned alive from space. The 12th of April 1961, the Soviet Union achieve a clear triumph in the space race. Aboard the Vostok 1, Yuri Gagarin makes a single orbit around the Earth and becomes the first man to reach space. He remained in space for 1 hour and 48 minutes before landing in Saratov Oblast, West Russia. The 18th of March 1965, Alexei Leonov leaves his spacecraft, the Voskhod 2, in a specialized spacesuit and conducts a 12-minute spacewalk, the first of its kind. The 14th of July 1965, the US satellite, Mariner 4, performs the first successful voyage to the planet Mars, returning the first close-up images of the Martian surface. The 21st of December 1968, US spacecraft Apollo 8 becomes the first human-crewed spacecraft to reach the Moon, orbit it, and successfully return to Earth. The 19th of April 1971, the USSR launches the first space station. Parts of this spacecraft will become core segments of the International Space Station, ISS, almost 30 years later in November 2000. The 15th of July 1975, with tensions between the US and USSR softening, the first cooperative Apollo-Soyuz mission is launched. With 2 separate flights, the Apollo and Soyuz spacecraft dock in space and the 2 commanders Tom Stafford and Alexei Leonov exchange the first international handshake. This act can be seen to symbolically end the space race, paving the way for future joint missions, such as the International Space Station and the Shuttle Mir program. Who won the space race? With no official measure of success, the winner of the space race is a point of controversy. Most historians agree that the space race ended on the 20th of July 1969 when Neil Armstrong stepped onto the Moon for the first time. As the climax of space history and exploration, the lunar landing led to a triumph for the US. While the US set a man on the Moon first, their success was fed by a series of pioneering achievements by the Soviet Union. The space race can be seen as a climactic comeback for the United States starting in 1968, rather than a decisive victory. Following the moon landing, the Soviet Union concentrated their efforts on building a space station. On the 7th of June 1971, the Soyuz 11 spacecraft successfully docked with the Salyut 1 space laboratory and completed a record 22-day stay, demonstrating that space exploration would continue. Furthermore, in May 1972, the US and the Soviet Union negotiated an easing of hostile relations. This thaw in the Cold War led to cooperation between the two nations on future missions, and the space race became a joint venture. The space race and the Cold War. Following the Second World War in 1946, tensions rose between two of the victors, the Soviet Union, USSR, and the United States, US. The primary source of conflict arose from the struggle between two political beliefs of communism, USSR, and capitalism, US. This conflict became known as the Cold War. The term cold in this context meant that there was no direct fighting between the two sides, but each sponsored and supported many conflicts across the world. The Cold War lasted until 1991 with the collapse of the Soviet Union. The space race played a significant part in the Cold War as the Americans and Soviets competed to prove their technological and intellectual superiority by becoming the first nation to put a human into space. From beginning to end, the world's attention was captivated by this contest for dominance. How did the space race affect the world? The space race has had a broader impact on society than just space exploration. Here are some of the ways the world has changed. Communication. The Earth is now surrounded by a network of satellites, which provide broadband communications and high-definition television, data used for weather reporting and GPS navigation and positioning. Many of these tools and systems were created and developed during the space race. Medical. The image processing used in CAT scans and radiography were both initially developed for deep space imaging and photography. NASA's innovations into shock-absorbent materials also helped create more functionally dynamic artificial limbs. Technology. The world's first portable computer and mouse were created for space exploration and adapted for the commercial markets. Even the wireless headsets we use today originate from NASA, creating hands-free equipment for astronauts and pilots. One of the classic examples is NASA's creation of the ballpoint pen for writing in space. However, the Soviet Union found a cost-effective method of using a pencil. President Kennedy's space race speech. On the 12th of September 1962, President John F. Kennedy delivered a speech to a large crowd gathered at the Rice Stadium in Houston, Texas. The speech called for an ambitious space exploration program that included not just missions to put astronauts on the moon, but various other space projects such as communications and weather satellites. The quotation, "We choose to go to the moon," is remembered as the tagline from the speech. The U.S. would succeed in this mission 8 years later, but Kennedy would not be around to see it. He was assassinated 2 years later in Dallas, Texas on the 22nd of November 1963. What even started the space race? Following the Second World War, the United States and the Soviet Union competed to see who had the best technology in space. This included events such as the first satellite to orbit Earth, the first human-crewed spacecraft, and the first person to walk on the moon. The space race was considered vital by the two nations as it showed the world which country had the superior scientific, economic, and political systems. Hope you find the video helpful. Before going, if you like the video, please share it with others and subscribe to my channel. Until the next time, goodbye.